Okay, time to reattach the CRT base. So how do I do it? Well, in past videos I showed a technique where I attached some extension wires onto these so I could hold this at a distance and feed it on and slide it up using those extension wires as a guide. However, when there's only 5, I found that it's actually not that difficult to put it on directly. One trick I found is to flip the base around and hold it up on this side and use it as a guide to bend and straighten these leads so that they all line up. And when you flip it around with a little bit of finesse, it'll slide right on. I also cleaned and tinned up the ends of all these so I can solder them on, and I used some solder wick to clean out the hollow ends of these pins. Alright, so what about reattaching it? Well, here are the remains of the old adhesive. It's like some kind of phenol-based resin, I believe. You can actually find the formula for this online. Bakelite base, glass, and this concoction held up pretty well, but over time it does deteriorate. So having it there is good because that means a thin bead of adhesive will reattach it. If it was all gone or deteriorated, you'd need to use some type of adhesive that had some body to it so it could attach it. So what to use? Boy, there are so many opinions on this. I almost hate to even wade into this, but I'll give you my 2 cents. Super glue will work, and work quite well, especially when this material remains. However, there seems to be some issue with it deteriorating with temperature. The hotter this gets, the more the glue will deteriorate. Will this get hot enough for that really to happen? I couldn't say. Don't really have enough experience. Some guys also use just plain old Elmer's white glue. Seems to work pretty well. What I use though is Permatex flowable windshield adhesive. It's a silicone adhesive that does not contain acetic acid. It doesn't have that vinegar smell. That stuff will attack copper. It's also sometimes called sensor safe RTV silicone adhesive. It bonds very well. I mean, thus the name. The Permatex windshield stuff is designed to bond to glass to other materials. It's also got a little bit of give. So when this heats up, there's some expansion, and having that little bit of give in the socket will not cause a problem. There's one thing you don't want to use is something like 2-part epoxy, something that's very, very hard, because say the glass expands a little bit more than the Bakelite base, you could crack this. Alright, so how do you get this on? Well, very carefully line it up, and if you look at the end, get a little bit of daylight coming through, you can actually see the pins, and with a little bit of luck, a little bit of finesse, get it back on, and there we go. A little bit of the lead poking through. It's seated nice and tight. Now I feed some solder into the end. I can see all 5 wires coming through. Right, my iron, and my solder. Make sure it's on straight. Don't want to get this crooked because in case you ever need to take any of this stuff off, the ion trap, magnet, or the focus coil, you want to make sure everything's lined up right so it'll slide off. Alright, so solder that. Heat up both the pin and the wire, especially the pin, because you want that solder to flow down inside the hollow pin. It will be attracted to heat. And leave kind of a nice round seal on the end. You want this to be neat because you got to get the socket on. If there's a big bump, big glob of solder on the end, the socket won't fit on very well. Two down. There's 3. So hopefully, in a moment, we will get a raster on this thing. Maybe even an image of sorts. Alright, CRT base and socket all hooked up. I rotated the chassis around a bit so I can get at the front controls more readily. So let's fire this puppy up again and see if we can get a raster. I'm going to cut the overhead light a bit. Fire up PR57. And here we go. The CRT filament is lighting up. As are all the other tubes. We got static. Hey, and we got a raster. Focuses pretty well. Brightness, I'm guessing. Contrast. Horizontal and vertical controls. No sound. We had sound before. But hey, how about that? For a weak CRT, that's not so bad. Yeah, I'm gonna fiddle around with this a bit and see if I can get that reception back. Well, I just haven't had any luck picking up good old low power over the air analog broadcast channel 6. So I hooked up an ATSC to NTSC over the air converter box. Go into the antenna terminals and let's see. Get something now. That looks promising. No sound though. Let's see if I can get this to lock. Oh, almost. I think if I tweak. Ooh, there we go. Horrible vertical linearity, it'd fold over. But that doesn't surprise me at all. I'd be surprised if it didn't actually. It's a really common issue when you got a leaky electrolytic on the vertical output tube, cathode bypass. And that's a very simple fix. Not sure where all that static is coming in. Makes me think there might be a little bit of some high voltage arcing going on somewhere. Either that or a bad connection. This twin lead here going to the antenna terminals is in better days, that's for sure. No, there we go. I just didn't have a signal source connected very well. Turn the brightness up a little. Horizontal hold was pretty lousy. Now there is a transformer in this set that has a slug you can adjust. I think if I tweak that a little bit, the horizontal lock will work a lot better. Vertical hold's pretty good though. That's with the brightness up all the way. Actually, the vertical hold's pretty bad too. And the video is not all that sharp. But considering how weak the CRT tested, it's actually not so bad. But no sound, obviously, so something happened. Did have sound earlier. I'm thinking maybe I just knocked something loose. Or maybe a cap. One of those paper caps has gone so leaky it won't let sound go through anymore. And of course, one of these tubes could be bad. That's the audio preamp tube, and that's when it's making a ton of static when I move it. Ooh, wow, that 6v6 metal tube is very hot. Also, this coax here has seen some better days. Looks like there's a splice in it here, so it might not have continuity anymore. Alright, so where to go from here? Well, I think I will do a little work on the caps and the vertical circuitry, see if we can get the vertical linearity better and take care of this fold over down here. I think just doing the cathode bypass and the vertical output tube will take care of that. That is this guy right there, C407C, 50 microfarad cap. I think it's rated for 50 volts. You see there is a vertical linearity control as well. It's on the back. By adjusting that, I could probably improve this a bit too. So I'm going to reach around back here and locate it. Yeah, that's probably it. It was maxed out. You know, who knows what was going on when this set was removed from service. For sure that fried 100 ohm resistor wasn't helping any. People may have been fiddling around with the controls on the back. There's two controls. There's going to be height and there's going to be linearity, and they interact with each other a bit. But we still get this issue at the bottom here where it's not filling up properly. Yeah, I just can't get the image to extend down to the bottom area of the screen no matter what I do. Alright, so let's go ahead and replace that cap. Here's the vertical output tube. The 50 microfarad cathode bypass cap used to go from here over to that. That's the 3-section electrolytic cap on the top of the chassis. I just cut that wire and mounted a new cap right down in here. So let's flip this over and give it another try. Still not so hot. Let's see if I adjust the controls, if it'll help any. Still kind of whacked out. So my next thought is that I should check the vertical output tube. Let's see. I believe that is this guy right here, 6K6. Yeah. So let's test this guy. It is an original tube, it appears. Curious if it's got this mark on its sticker. Well, that output tube tested fine, but I went ahead and swapped it out anyways, and didn't help matters any. I also replaced the 6SN7 that drives the 6K6, and again, no improvement, so the search continues. I've been going through and testing the rest of the tubes. Went through video and audio IF. I found one weak 6AU6 and one weak 6AL5. Fortunately, when I pulled all the tubes out, they got mixed up, so I don't know which tubes exactly were bad, if they were in the audio or the video or the sync circuit. But at any rate, I replaced those two. Now I'm checking the lower chassis, and I got to the 6SQ7 audio preamp tube. And it's pretty darn weak, so I'm trying to dig up a replacement for that. So what I was thinking is, when I was tuning into that over-the-air channel 6, that's really an FM radio station, 87.7, the very end of the FM dial, and channel 6 on the VHF NTSC broadcast band overlap a bit. Well, they broadcast with a much stronger audio carrier than video carrier, and normally when I tune one of these vintage sets into that channel, the sound is booming loud. In this set, we just barely heard it. And when I use my over-the-air converter box, which has normal audio and video carrier levels, there's no sound at all. So what I'm thinking is, maybe we've just got really weak gain on the audio because of a tube like this, and if I replace it, maybe I'll get sound back. If only one I could dig up readily was a glass version, but it should be okay for testing. I'll dig up a metal version like the original was at some point. Since I moved, my tubes are really, really badly organized. Well, right off the bat, doesn't look like we got much change. Yeah, you know, it's usually not the tubes. These sets are designed to be very tolerant of weak and out-of-spec tubes. I suspect, as usual, my problems are going to be mostly paper caps and more out-of-spec resistors. Yeah, really, with all that, absolutely nothing has changed in the set. Alright, so we've got a couple major issues to deal with. No sound and vertical issues. I'm going to tackle the vertical first because I think it'll be more straightforward. The sound may require an alignment, so I just as soon wait on that till everything else is working. So this is the area we need to focus on. So it's more or less working. The height control responds, linearity, the hold, but it's not filling the whole screen, in particular the bottom. It doesn't go all the way down to the bottom, and there's some fold over at the bottom. Well, there's a few things that could be causing that. Potentially an issue with the yoke, or output transformer, or signal feeding the output tube, which means the circuit that generates that waveform could have a problem, which involves this blocking transformer. Now, it's not a major problem. The yoke isn't open, and we wouldn't have any vertical deflection. Likewise, output transformer. Likewise, blocking oscillator. Could be a shorted turn, possibly, but Well, I really don't think so. I think the problems would be more prominent. What I think is most likely is that the waveform driving the output tube is not correct. It's basically a sawtooth. So, something like that. So, in other words, as it's going up, it's moving the electron beam up and down on the screen. Well, notice that circuit involves some capacitors, so that's where I think the problem lies. Possibly this 0.1 or 0.05. Those are going to be paper caps. Don't think it's going to be over here. This is part of the sync pulse forming network. Even if there was no signal coming in, you could basically take this out of the circuit, and this would be a free running oscillator, and it has problems even in that situation, so I don't think we have to worry about that stuff. Also, one or more of these resistors could be out of spec. Now, I've swapped out these tubes, and the tubes I tested were good to begin with, so that's not the issue. It was easy enough to locate those two paper caps right here, 0.1, 0.05. There's the vertical oscillator blocking transformer. This big guy up here is a vertical output transformer, and there's the vertical output tube. So what I'm going to do right now is measure some resistances. So let's see, we got a 1.8K, 2K, off a bit, but not so much concerns me. Now this should be a 2.2 meg. And it's only about half of that. So here's the deal when you measure resistors. If you get a reading that's higher than it's supposed to be, guaranteed there's an issue, assuming there's no power in the set. If there is, some voltage will feed back into the meter and throw the reading off. Assuming everything's discharged, if a resistor measures high in the circuit, you know it's a problem. If it measures low, may or may not be a problem, because there might be something else in parallel with it that's conductive, that's affecting the reading. The only way to know for sure is to clip one of the leads. So that measured low. There's no way for me to tell unless I cut a lead. Now, if you were hoping to reuse this component if it measures good, I don't recommend cutting the lead, but I'm inclined to replace it regardless. And what I've also seen in some of these old sets is they do this, they measure it, and if it measures good, they kind of butt the ends back together and tack solder it back in, which is an option, but it's not a very strong joint. So now let's see what we get. 2.9 and climbing, so it actually is good. Notice that reading is fluctuating a lot. Yeah, it's the problem with carbon comp resistors. They can be very sensitive to heat. So me putting my finger on it is altering it a bit. Not a very stable reading, so I'll replace it anyways, but it is basically within specs, so I don't think that's a problem. I'm going over here, this should be 270,000 ohms or 270K. It's measuring 376. So that is out of spec for sure. This should be a 6.8 mega ohm. Or is it 680K? It sure looks like a green band. Let's consult the schematic. Well, it should be 6.8 meg. So again, I'm going to have to take this out of circuit to see for sure if it's an issue or not. Hey, you know what? It's actually kind of rubbing up against a component next to it. That shouldn't be. Move it out of the way. No, it's actually measuring 1/10 the value it should be. So again, I'll clip the lead. If you did want to potentially put the component back in, I suggest unwrapping the lead from the terminal so you can reattach it securely. Yeah, that's really out of spec. That's why generally these carbon comps are always going to be high, 20, 30, 40, 50%. That's why I just clipped the leads, because I suspected I'd be changing them regardless. So we definitely got some out of spec resistors. Not tremendously, but enough to definitely potentially affect the circuit, especially the 6.8 meg. I'm feeling pretty confident that the capacitors are going to be the problem, so I actually did tack those resistors back into the circuit and tacked a couple new caps in place, and let's power it up again. That is definitely looking different. Adjust the controls on the back again. It's extending all the way down past the bottom now. Sink is kind of crappy though. Oh yeah, that took care of the problem. Now remember, this is not a porthole set to the screen. The raster should not fill the entire screen. There should be a gap at the top and the bottom of about 1.5 inches. Actually, I've got too much height. Decrease it a little, tweak the linearity. In fact, actually, I kind of now have the opposite problem. There we go. You may have just noticed the screen jump a little bit. Well, that's because I just zapped myself pretty good. A little smell of burnt hair in the air, a little burn in my arm. It's because my arm brushed against the plate cap on the horizontal output tube. Not enough to be fatal by any means, but stings a little bit. I adjusted the controls a bit more, and that is looking pretty good. Notice there was some twisting with the horizontal. Well, if I increase the contrast, it gets worse and worse. In fact, I have to have contrast all the way down to really eliminate that twisting, which leads me to think there's some issue with the horizontal sync circuitry. But the vertical height and linearity are looking pretty good. So definitely a good idea when you're working on these sets to either put that cover back on when you're going to be poking around the back of the set, or stay well clear of this area.